Just to give you a word of warning, I'll periodically be interspersing bits of advice, some of which you'll probably find either surprising or annoying or contrary to expectation. Um, I'm going to start out talking about some really very general stuff about calling touches and stuff, and only moving on to the nuts and bolts of actual touches and stuff later. Um, while the emphasis of the nuts and bolts parts is going to be Bob doubles, a lot of this is really applicable to lots of other stages and to other methods and stuff. I mean, a lot of calling touches is about calling touches and not about a particular method or whatever. But doubles is, easy in many ways. Another thing to bear in mind is that, like so much of ringing, calling touches about patterns of things, and seeing these patterns in ringing is often a lot easier at higher stages because you get more of the regular stuff at higher stages. And as you get to lower and lower stages, you're throwing away the regular stuff and keeping the weird stuff. You can see that in Bob doubles right away, that the weird stuff is making seconds and making the 4 blows at the back, and the dodging is a much more regular thing. So, if you know playing Bob caters, you spend most of the lead ends dodging and just every once in a while make seconds or make long blows behind. If you're ringing Bob doubles, half the time you're doing the weird stuff. And so a lot of that is applicable when you're calling touches and stuff as well. That said, doubles is also unique in many ways. It's down so small that there's some tricks you can play with doubles that you can't do with plain Bob at any higher stage. And lower stages are irrelevant because you usually don't want to call touches in minimis since a plain course is an extent. The first thing to bear in mind when you're going to approach calling touches or other conducting sort of efforts is that, you're going to have to think about something other than putting your bell in the right place when you're ringing. This is a new skill. Most people, the first time they do this, it's by saying Bob, or at least by saying, go next time or something. If you have an opportunity to actually practice this, it's good to practice it as a separate skill. You have to be careful. I mean, you don't want to be screwing up touches that people want to ring for some other reason, mess up service ringing, mess up a touch at practice that's intended for someone else. But if you have a friendly band available, you can likely make other things happen that are going to be good at practicing this. One of the things you want to practice is watch what other bells are doing while you're ringing. If you put enough effort into it, odds are you're going to make it harder for you to put your own bell in the right place, but you're going to learn a lot. And with practice, you'll be able to do both things at the same time. The good things to watch are where the treble is all the time if you can, or, various places when the treble is someplace, at the front, at the back, whatever. Another good thing to watch is which bell is leading at each whole pull. If through a whole lead you can see that, you've learned something. Another thing to do is pick some piece of work that's not the one you're going to do at a lead end, and try and watch the bell. Try and figure, if you know the bell is going to do it, even better. But try and watch the bell doing it. So maybe while you're lying behind, doing the long fifths at a lead end in a plain course of playing Bob doubles, try and see the bells dodging in 3/4. That starts to help take your mind off of just worrying about your own bell. If you've got a suitably supported band, even better is an opportunity to learn to talk while you're ringing. That sounds like it should be pretty trivial, but it's actually surprisingly hard the first few times you do it, at least if you don't want to go wrong while you're talking. If you've got several people that want to practice this, it's a great opportunity. We've done this, many times. As you start ringing a course of Bob doubles, and start talking to each other. Start asking each other questions. What was your first phone number? Set each other simple arithmetic problems. What's 29 minus 14? You're struggling to do this at the same time you're trying to dodge 3/4 down, and it's surprising how hard it is. But with practice, it gets a lot easier. And these are skills that are going to serve you really well when you try to extend to doing something like conducting that's beyond simply ringing your own bell in the right place. I'm reminded of something Marge Winter used to say all the time. Marge she lives in the UK now, but she called many of the first peals, mostly in hand, but some in tower, for the North American Guild, and was one of the real leading lights of the first years of the North American Guild. And she always said, if you never go wrong when you're conducting, you're not trying hard enough. So, you know, it's good to practice this sort of thing. Another important thing is simply speaking loudly and clearly enough when you're conducting. First time you're calling a touch, you know, you come to where, I think this is where I'm supposed to pull the bob. I'll say, Bob? No, you know, that's not it. Say, Bob. Always be loud, be clear. While it's possible to be too loud, I can think of at least one conductor I really hate to stand next to. It's rare that somebody is too loud, and it's usually much better to be too loud than too soft. You want to be heard. Even if you put a bob in the wrong place, it's better to put the bob in the wrong place than to have people not know quite whether you intended there to be a bob there or not. So that's another, you know, general piece of advice. Another really important one is when to say whatever it is you're going to say. I don't mean by this the stuff for people that are putting people straight and whether you need to talk to somebody or not. I mean the really straightforward stuff like when to say Bob, when to say go plain Bob doubles, when to say this is all. It's important to be consistent. The general rule is to give one whole pull warning of whatever it is you want folks to do. You know, that's sort of fungible and soft, and some people tend to be a little bit earlier than others, and so on. It's more important to be consistent than to be in any specific place, but basically the general rule is one whole pull. That means it's usually tied to the position where the treble is pulling off or where the treble is ringing, not where your own bell is ringing. I mean, if you think about it, sometimes when you need to say something like Bob, you're going to be near the front, sometimes you're going to be near the back. If you base what you say on where your bell is, you're going to be all over the place as far as everybody else is concerned. So it's really useful to watch the treble. And almost everything you say is going to be based on where the treble is. So this general rule of giving a whole pull, for a couple, you know, for the specific cases, when you say go, that usually means you need to do it as the treble is pulling off its hand stroke before that first change, because you have to give a full blow of warning, full whole pull of warning. So what's the first time somebody does something different? It's as the treble goes up into seconds and the two leads. So to give that full whole pull, you should say go as you watch the treble pulling off its hand stroke in rounds at the hand stroke before the first row of changes. If you do it as you're pulling off your hand stroke, say you're ringing the 5, you're going to be almost a half pull too late. If you're ringing the 2, you'll be close to it, but between the 2 and the 5, there'll be a huge difference. So watch the treble. When you say Bob, that's usually when the treble's pulling off its backstroke in seconds. Okay, why is that? The first blow where something happens different is the bell that's running out from 2 to 3. So that bell that's running out at the Bob is the first bell that has to know something's going to happen differently. And the time it's going to do something different is when it runs out instead of making seconds. So you usually call a Bob about as the treble's ringing in seconds. Another way to think of that is that as the treble is ringing after the bell that led in front of the treble. We'll see later, that's actually pretty useful. that, if you can watch who the treble's following down to the front, it makes it really easy to see when the treble's ringing in seconds. That the relationship between bells is much easier to see than just where one particular bell is at one particular instance of time. A couple little asides here. This bob, as the treble pulls off in seconds, in other methods, it's different. In Stedman, people generally call bobs a little bit later because the bobs happen towards the back of the change rather than the front. Again, it's a matter of taste. It varies by person, but they're usually a little bit later. In Grancer, they need to be much earlier because the bob takes place earlier in the lead. So in Grancer, you're typically calling bobs as the treble's pulling off a hand stroke in thirds. When you say this is all, you should do that as the treble pulls off its hand stroke lead, because the first row that makes a difference is the next hand stroke. That instead of hunting through that lead end or whatever it is, we're going to stay put and ring rounds. And that's assuming that the touch comes round as usual at backstroke. At hand stroke, obviously, is going to be a little bit different. One other odd little piece of advice. If you have to call go rounds because the touch is falling apart, it's best to do that around the time that a hand stroke row should be starting. Depending on how horribly things have fallen apart, sometimes you can't even tell where hand stroke row is supposed to be starting. But if you're not lost yourself, you probably have a pretty good idea of where hand stroke row is supposed to be starting. And if you say go rounds, then people seem to have an easier time fitting in. It's more the sort of thing that they're used to. In particular, if you call it backstroke, it's much more likely that bad things happen, that people try to ring rounds at hand stroke when they should be ringing a backstroke, stuff like that. That most people, when they go rounds, they're happier doing it at hand stroke. So that's just a random little piece of advice. And of course, if you can see enough of it to say go rounds when as many bells are possible to being close to the rounds position already, which at higher numbers you often can see, that makes it even easier. But that's just a random piece of advice. I'm gonna stop right now. So sort of this general bizarre stuff I've been talking about so far. Do we have, any questions or anything, or is this making sense so far? And can people hear me and everything else? Seeing, whoops, that wasn't what I intended to do. Seeing nothing, I'll keep going. When you're calling bob doubles, the most interesting touch for most people is to call an extent. An extended bob doubles is short enough, 120 changes, that it's a very reasonable practice night touch. Often on practice night, you might ring 2 of them together, 3 of them together. So that's the place most people start, and it's a sensible place to start. In reality, using the ordinary bobs, there's actually only one extent of playing bob doubles possible. It's sort of 4 different ones because you can rotate it, but fundamentally all 4 of them are the same touch. So how can we understand that? While the next couple of things you don't need to know to call a touch, it's useful to know how touches are put together and stuff. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about this. There are only 24 possible leads of bob doubles. Okay, why is that? Well, when a lead starts, the treble's got to be in first place. So there are only 4 more bells. So how many ways are there to arrange 4 bells? Well, as I think every change ringer knows, that's 4 factorial, which is 24. So there are 24 possible leads of playing bob doubles. Now, each of these leads has two rows where the treble's leading, the hand stroke and the backstroke. The backstroke row is the lead head because it's the row at the beginning of the lead. The hand stroke of the treble's lead is the lead end because that's at the end of a lead. And then you've got the seconds and fifths in between them. If you think about the way Bob Doubles works, if we ring forward through a lead of Bob Doubles, we're going to ring exactly the same rows as if that lead head had been a lead end and we rang it backwards. So of these 24 possible leads, they actually pair into only 12 unique pairs of leads, each of which is the reverse of one other. And gee, a lead is 10 rows and an extent is 120, and 10 times 12, gee, we ring every one of these pairs exactly once, and that's what makes an extent. So to make a true extent, what you need is one instance of each of these 12 pairs of rows. If we don't make any calls, so we ring a plain course or we ring something starting from a different lead, we get back to where we started after we've rung 4 leads. We need 12 of these lead pairs, and we get 4 of them before we make a call. Gee whiz, that sounds like we probably only need 3 sets of these 4 unique courses. And that's exactly what the standard extent of, the only extent with ordinary bobs of plain Bob Doubles is you ring 4 leads, you call a bob, you ring 4 leads, you call a bob, you ring 4 leads, you call a bob. We can rotate that. We could ring 2 leads, call a bob, then 4 leads, call a bob, 4 leads, call a bob, and 2 leads, call a bob. Where those first 2 and those last 2 join up to make 4. So we've just rotated the first touch we rang. This extent is often described simply as 3 bobs with the same bell unaffected. Huh? Okay. We ring 4 leads, and that means the bell that had made fifths to start at the very end is ringing long fifths again when it's time to call the bob. Well, in Bob Doubles, that's the one bell that's unaffected by the one bell other than the treble that's unaffected by the bob. So it's pretty obvious that if we do that 3 times, all 3 times that same bell is unaffected. We can again rotate that. So the extent I've written out here, and this is all the rows of an extent, where this stuff, the lead heads, notice they're the same as the previous one, so that this bottom row is just a duplicate to make it easy to see what's going on. So we got to 1, 4, 2, 3, 5 here with that bob, and so the next, these are really the same row, these 2. People are seeing my pointer. Somebody will tell me.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, we are.
Okay, good. If we simply rotate this, like this one, obviously a different bell is going to be the one that's unaffected. You'll notice that in this case, I've elided a bunch of the stuff, that we don't need to see all this stuff. Seeing the lead ends and the lead heads is sufficient for us to get a pretty good idea of what's going on here. In this one, it's the 2 that's unaffected every time. And in fact, that's what the 4 rotations of the extent of Bob Doubles are, is which bell do we ring, do we leave unaffected? If we call a bob at the first lead, then ring 3 plain leads and a bob, 3 plain leads and a bob, 3 plain leads. Then we've got the 4 staying put at the lead ends. And the other one is if we have the 3 unaffected by all 3 bobs. And here I've elided even more of the touch. Um, okay, this notion of describing a touch by which bell is unaffected is very common all through ringing for lots of for most methods and for most stages. It's convenient because it's a succinct way of describing a touch. For higher stages, it makes it easy to write things down. For higher stages, you typically have lots of bells that are unaffected, and they're usually all together. So for example, when you're describing a 10 bell, a touch of royal, you'll usually keep 7, 8, 9, 10 completely unaffected. Depending on what you're doing, you might even keep 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 unaffected. So it's convenient, but it's dangerous. It's not good for that to be the only way you can think about what a touch is doing. In many ways, this unaffected bell is the hardest to see what's going on with. Remember, we have to call the bob as the treble's ringing in seconds. The unaffected bell is usually the furthest one away from where the treble is of all the bells. So that makes it a little harder. And it also seduces you into just having this one very specific piece of information about where to put the bob. In ringing, as you've probably all discovered, the more different ways you have to think about what you're doing, the better off you are. Because, if you forget something or you go wrong in some way, 3 different ways you're thinking about it, they can kind of vote. And, the 2 that say, hey, the one you thought we disagree, but we agree with each other, then your brain sort of says, oh, I was about to make a mistake, but I'm not going to make a mistake. The same thing goes for conducting and putting bobs in and so on. So it's dangerous to think of it just in terms of what bell is unaffected. In many ways, it's much better to think of this touch not as one bell unaffected for 3 bobs, but 3 bobs, each of which affects the same 3 bells. Just as the 5 was unaffected in this rotation of the extent, 2, 3, 4 are the 3 bells that are affected. Now, they're affected differently each time, of course, but like everything else in ringing, there's a pattern here. And if we look at any one bell, let's look at the 2. What did it do? It ran out, it made fourths, it ran in. The other 2 bells do the same thing, just rotated. So the 4 runs in, runs out, and makes fourths. That's the same as if we looked here. Remember the 2, it made fourths, it ran in, then if we kept going, it was going to run out again. Just like the 4th does, it runs in, runs out, fourths. So you just think of that little cycle, and the 3 is the same. And whenever you call these 3 bobs in the same position, every bell except the one that's unaffected is going to be going through this little cycle. Run in, run out, make fourths, run in, run out, make fourths, run in, run out, make fourths. Just figure out where it starts. So in fact, one way to call an extent of bob doubles is to just not even make up your mind before you start. Just some lead end, call a bob. If it's your bell, see what your bell does. If it runs in, then the next bob's got to be when you run out. The next bob's got to be when you make fourths. So this is actually a much more useful way to keep track of it, and it will serve you well when you start calling more complicated things on higher numbers of bells and so on. Okay, so that's sort of, roughly what do I do when I want to call a bob. Okay, I'm gonna get in the tower and I'm actually gonna do this. I feel like I can talk and ring at the same time, and I have an idea of how these touches work. I want to call a touch. Which bell should I ring? Really often, people think the easiest thing to do is take the bell that's unaffected by the 3 bobs. Wrong. That's the hardest bell. It's going to be furthest away from the treble when it's time to call the bob. If, as people often do, they call this one where the 5 is unaffected, you're going to be ringing the heaviest bell. So you're going to have the most work to do, and more importantly, if you're at all shaky, you're going to disturb the rhythm of the ringing more than any other. You're much better off ringing one of the bells that is affected, and it's no harder. Knowing that I got to do run out, make fourths, run in is no harder than knowing I got to do long fifths, long fifths, long fifths. So I would strongly advise you to take one of the bells that is affected. It helps you watch the treble, which is incredibly useful. When you get a little bit better at conducting and you're starting to keep other people straight, and often this happens really quickly because often you got a band where nobody's really confident about ringing touches, and so whoever steps up and starts doing it, they're the one that suddenly has to keep everybody else straight too, really quickly. It's way easier to keep people straight when you're one of the bells that's affected by the bob. Why? Because of the 3 bells that might do something wrong at a bob, you're one of them. You know where you are, and you're also working very closely with the other 2 bells that are doing stuff. It's really easy to see what's going on at the bob. If you're unaffected, you're away from it. It's harder to see what's going on. So I highly recommend picking one of the bells that is affected. Another reason is there's less communication required. If you're not affected by the bob, there are 3 other people that have to hear what you're saying. If you're one of them already knows what you're saying because it's you when you're saying it. And if somebody goes wrong, well, if you're one of the 3 people that might go wrong, you're the easiest person to put straight. You don't have to talk to yourself. You have a really good communication bandwidth to yourself to put yourself straight. Okay, another piece of advice, what bell should I call it from, is don't pick the 5. There's a real temptation to ring the 5 when you're starting out conducting. A big piece of it is because most touches, this 3 bobs with a 5 unaffected is probably the most popular rotation. It's definitely the most popular rotation of the extended bob doubles. And at higher stages, again, it's the back bells that tend to be left unaffected. So there's a real temptation for people to ring back there. There's also a real temptation. This goes right back to when people are first ringing plain courses of things to ring the bell at the back, because it feels like the rope sight's easier. That, hey, I'm at the end, everybody's in front of me. You're doing yourself a huge disservice here. If you're trying to put bobs in, this sort of cheating on the rope sight isn't really going to help you. It's just going to take you down a path that's going to make life harder and harder as time goes on. And if you're the conductor, you're needing to talk to other people. If you're in the middle of the row, you've got less distance to go to everybody else. So it's really good to be in the middle where you're adjacent to at least 2 other, well, you're adjacent to 2 other bells that you need to talk to, and you're closer to everybody. There's nobody that's far away from you, which is the case if you're at one end or the other. So, better audibility makes it easier to eventually put people straight. When you get to the point where you're helping put other people where they belong, the easiest people to talk to and tell where they need to go are the people that are right next to you. No, you can practically whisper in their ears. It's the people that are, far away on the other side of the circle that you have to bellow at, that you have a lot of trouble with. So, my advice is take one of the bells in the middle and call an extent, a rotation of the extent, such that you are actually affected by it. So maybe, hey, I want to ring the 3, and I'll call the usual extent that has the 5 unaffected. So I just know I'm going to call a bob where I make fourths, I make a bob where I run in, I make a bob where I run out. If you can watch where the treble is, okay. Remember, if you're using crossing the treble to tell you where to dodge, that's going to be a big help for knowing when the treble is ringing its backstroke in seconds. So again, if I'm ringing the 3 and I want to call the rotation of the extent that is the 5 unaffected, that first bob, I'm going to cross the treble in 2/3. And as I'm doing it, I'm going to be ringing over the treble. Watch that treble as she pulls off her hand stroke and her backstroke in seconds before leading. Say bob. Say it loudly, say it clearly, say it with confidence. Just pretending that you know what you're doing is half the battle. You'll make force. The next time when you're going to be running in, that means you're going to be coursing down after the treble. So it's going to be ringing its backstroke in seconds as you're ringing your backstroke in fourths. So again, watch the treble, and as you see it pull off its backstroke as you're about to, but haven't quite pulled off your backstroke in fourths, say bob, loudly, clearly, with confidence. Then at the very end, you're coursing down ahead of the treble. So this one's particularly easy. You finish your lead, your backstroke finishing your lead, that's when the treble's ringing in seconds at backstroke, say bob, and then you'll run out. And don't forget that right then you're also going to have to say, as you see the treble leading in hand stroke, this is all. Similar sorts of, preparation can go into calling touches from, other bells, other rotations of the extent, and so on. Okay, so that's the simple immediate stuff. How do we go about putting other people straight? How do we go about knowing whether the ringing's right? I mean, okay, after I can call an extent pretty consistently, gee, it'd be nice to call a quarter. Well, how do I do that? I call 10, 11 extents will give me a quarter. If I want to be fancy, 10 and a half extents. But 11 cents is a perfectly reasonable quarter. 13.20, it's not too long. Gee, be really ashamed to do that. And if in the third of those extents, somebody went wrong and we don't find out about it till we reach the end and it doesn't come around, that would really annoy us. Or maybe it wouldn't annoy us, but it would be disappointing, especially if we would have had time to start over if we realized when it happened. So how do we keep track of whether it's right? And even, other great value is how do we, help put other people straight? The big thing is, of course, coursing order. So what is coursing order? Well, we know, I'm sure we all know, we're following other bells all the time. We know what it means to course somebody or to have somebody course after us. And through playing Bob on any number of bells, almost all the time, everybody's coursing somebody else. And you're spending almost all your time doing that. And so, the 2 is followed by the 4, is followed by the 5, is followed by the 3. Another way to look at that is it's the order the bells lead in. It's also the order the bells lie behind in. If you want to be really funny, it's the order the bells go from 4 to 3 in, 3. Um, we can write that down, oops, there, as just a cycle of these 4 bells. So when we're ringing the first lead of plain bob doubles, the 2 leads, then the 4 leads, then the 5 leads, then the 3 leads, then the 1 leads. Okay, that's that first lead. This second one, it's really similar. Again, it's 2, then 4, then 5, but it's not the 3. The 1 sneaks in, and then it's the 3. And what's going on all through this is we've got really the 4 working bells, and the treble bounces between them. So the treble's following is between the 3 and the 2, and the first lead is between the 5 and the 3, and the next lead of the plain chorus is between the 4 and the 5, and the next one, and so on. So normally when we talk about a coursing order, we think of it as just the working bells. We don't include the treble. What makes this so useful is this order only changes when there's a call. Till there's a call, the coursing order stays constant. Constant in the sense of a cycle. Where we are in the cycle goes around. So for example, when a bell makes seconds, it sort of takes a step back in the cycle. So, we go 2 leads, 4 leads, 5 leads, 3 leads. The 3 makes seconds. 3 leads, 2 leads, 4 leads, 5 leads. The 5 makes seconds. 5 leads, 3 leads, 2 leads, 4 leads, and so on. But we can write down this cycle, and it's a cycle, so we can write it down 4 different ways. But they're all really the same cycle, and it's conventional and quite useful to pick one of these rotations as canonical. Oops, that wasn't where I wanted that line to be. Line. There we go. It's conventional to pick one of these rotations as canonical, and that canonical one has our fixed bell, which in the case of this rotation of an extended bob doubles is the 5, either at the beginning or the end. And since we know it's always at the beginning, say we pick this as our canonical rotation, we can just always leave the 5 off. The other, after we've had a bob in our prototypical touch of bob doubles, so when we get here, we've had 1 bob, we get here, the coursing order has now become 4, 3, 5, 2. Here we go. 4, 3, 5, 2. So again, we can leave that 5 off. And so a coursing order is really just the 3 bells other than the one we're leaving off. We're leaving off our fixed bell. So it's just 3 numbers. And okay, there's only 3 bobs. So there are only going to be 3 coursing orders total. So that's really not too much. You'll notice we go through them, we come back again. How many different ways are there of ordering 3 things? There are only 6. We use 3 of them in each extent. And it turns out, even if we're ringing all 4 different rotations of the extent, say, because, we want to ring a quarter and we don't want to get confused how many extents we've rung, maybe, we like to ring different rotations of the same one to keep ourselves focused. For any one extent, we certainly only have to recall 3 of these 6 possible orders. And in fact, it's easier than that. Since we're ringing a whole course each time, that's what happens between the bobs. Here's the one with the 2 fixed. You know, again, we're ringing 4 leads. We're ringing all the possible leads with that coursing order. Well, remember, we can't ring a lead backwards that's one we've already rung, or, you know, we're obviously going to repeat ourselves because we're ringing exactly the same rows. So one of the coursing orders we never see. It's the coursing order that's the reverse of the plain Bob coursing order. And here I've written out the coursing orders of the 4 rotations of the extent, and you'll see 4, 2, 3 never appears because that's the reverse of the plain course. But the plain course, of course, always reappears. When we're ringing an extended plain Bob doubles, we always ring the whole plain course. We might ring the whole thing at the beginning. We might ring half of it at the beginning, half of it at the end. We might ring 1 lead of it at the beginning and 3 leads of it at the end. But we're ringing the whole thing. And then we're ringing all of 2 other courses. So for each extent, there's only 2 other things we have, 2 other coursing orders we have to know. How do we get between these coursing orders? For the extent that has the 5 fixed, there's sort of a little pattern. Notice that, okay, as we went at this bob to there, we went to the coursing order 2, 4, 3. And then at that next bob, we went to the coursing order 4, 3, 2. When we write those out, there's a little pattern here that the first of those 3 numbers jumps over the other 2, and the other 2 slide down. This is way more useful than just helping us know how to get from one coursing order to the next. If we know that this is going on, we know what everybody's doing at the bob, because the guy that jumps over is always the one that's making force at the bob. The first of the 2 guys that's sliding down is always the one that's running out at the bob. In fact, because he's running out, the treble's coursing after him. And then the bell that's running in is the one that's coursing down after the treble. That's what happens when you call a bob. And so this little shape tells us this is the guy that runs out, this is the guy that runs in, this is the guy that makes the bob. So for our favorite extended bob doubles, if we know these 3 coursing orders, we know at the first bob, 3 runs out, 2 runs, 3 makes it, 2 runs out, 4 runs in. Second bob, 2 makes it, 4 runs out, 3 runs in. Third bob, 4 makes it, 3 runs out, 2 runs in. That makes sense. Yeah, obviously if it's going to come to rounds, the 2 runs in, the 3 runs out, the 4 makes it. So this is incredibly useful. Excuse me. Further, this ends up being useful for plain bob at higher stages and for almost all the methods we ring. Just a few oddball methods like Granser and Stedman is it different. But almost everything that gets rung regularly, this sort of pattern comes up a lot. It gets a little more complicated at higher stages, but you know, if you kind of learn this thing in bob doubles, it's going to be useful to you. Okay, let's consider the extent where we have the 2 unaffected. One way to look at that is to make our canonical rotation of our coursing order have the 2 fixed. So looking at that, again, the plain course is the same. Once we've had our first bob, our coursing order goes to 2, 5, 3, 4. 2, 5, 3, 4. And so again, this little pattern applies this again. This 4 jumps over as it makes the bob, the 5 is running out, the 3 is running in, and the second one we do it again. That's one way to keep track of the coursing order in bob doubles. Is that the best way to do it? That's a matter of taste. Some people do it that way. Some people, particularly who are used to ringing things on higher numbers, prefer to keep track of the coursing order by thinking of the 5 fixed. Keep our canonical rotation the one that always has the 5 fixed. Um, the downside of this is we don't get to use that same pattern because the 5 is actually being affected. So it has to, it has to jump through. But it turns out there's a nice little trick anyway, that, and this only applies to bob doubles. It's not good for any other stage. It's good for other doubles methods, work for St. Simon's doubles, for example. But for a single hunt doubles method only, the bell that's unaffected by the bob swaps with the bell after it in the coursing order. So the extent of bob doubles that has the 2 unaffected, what we see happening is the 2 at that first bob simply swaps with the bell after it, which is the 4. And then at the next bob, it'll swap with the bell after it, which is the 5. So that's just another way of saying we pull the 2 around to the front of the coursing order and leave the 2 bells in front of us unaffected. And then it swaps again. So that's often useful when you're trying to figure out the coursing order in bob doubles. It's just a, it's a separate little trick. The extent with rotated so that the 5 is unaffected is often the easiest one because as you get more and more into calling things, you're going to see these 3 coursing orders over and over and over again. They are your friends. I mean, this is Fred and this is Jane. I mean, you know these guys. But the extent that has the 2 unaffected, it's got a nice property too. It consists of 3 coursing orders, the plain course one, and after a while, 3, 2, 4 just becomes instinctive. You know that's the plain course. Well, these other 2, they're just the plain course coursing order with 1 adjacent pair of bells swapped. So the second pair swapped here, and the first pair swapped here. So those are in many ways 2 super easy coursing orders to keep track of. And gee whiz, if we look at these 2 extents, between them, they have every possible coursing order we're ever going to see in bob doubles if we're only ringing normal extents. Because we never get the 6th possible coursing order, which is the reverse of the plain course. So, this stuff gets us really far. And, we kind of got everything we have to know here. Let's see. We're getting short on time. So I will just summarize the other stuff I was going to say. So far, we've just been talking about calling extents. There are shorter touches of bob doubles possible. They're likely, I don't remember, but they're likely both modular rotation in the diary. That's for true touches. But you know what? If you're just ringing a touch at practice, doesn't have to be true. You can do all sorts of things, and who cares if if you ring some of the rows again? They're good ones. There's a benefit there. I mean, you don't want to do that if you're ringing a quarter. Probably you'd like your quarter to be true, but for practice, there's no need. And in particular, if you're teaching somebody else to make bobs at a practice, it can be really useful to ring really false touches. You want somebody to learn how to run out at a bob. Call a bob. Person has trouble running out. So the next lead, you call a bob again. They have to run out again. Do it 3 times in a row. Do it 5 times in a row. However many times you need to do it in a row to make sure they get to where they need to get to. Again, for running in, calling lots of bobs in a row can be really useful. Turns out one of the other useful touches is you call the same bell to make the bob 3 times. And making the bob is something you do every other lead in bob doubles. So to help somebody understand how to make the bob in bob doubles, call them you know, a bob every other lead, and you're going to give them a lot of practice making the bob. Even learning how to make long fifths at a bob, if they can also make fourths, is something you can speed up. Again, by calling a bob every lead, they'll make fourths, they'll make long fifths. They'll make fourths, they'll make long fifths. So don't be afraid to call false touches. The thing you have to be able to do is see where the treble is so you can call it at the right moment in the lead. But yeah, who cares if it's you know, a real touch or not. Just one final thought for the future that we won't have time to go into, but it'd be great for you to explore, is because there are only 6 possible coursing orders, and 2 of them bring up rounds. The plain course brings up rounds in the usual way, and the one that we don't see in a normal true extent is the reverse of the plain course. So it brings up rounds at hand stroke. Turns out, if you think about it and work through it, no matter where you are in plain bob doubles, doesn't matter how many bobs you've called, where you've called them, what they are, either if you keep ringing, you're going to come round, or by calling one bob, you're going to get to a place where you can come round. So you can, with a little bit of work, I mean, it's not trivial, but it's not hard. You can learn, if you can follow the coursing order, how to call bob doubles around from anywhere by calling at most one bob. That's a great thing to spend some time playing with paper and pencil and then learn how to do. And you can use that for making, you know, wonderful little touches to call it practice. It looks like black magic. And after you sort of studied it with, you know, for an hour with a piece of paper and a pencil, it isn't black magic. You've got a pretty good idea of how to do it. The important thing is being able to figure out what the coursing order is while you're ringing. That's not as hard as you think it is. It's the order you pass the bells. So I'm ringing. Oh, okay, I'm hunting up. I passed the 3, I passed the 5, I passed the 2, and I'm the 4. That means the coursing order's got to be 4, 3, 2. So, you know, every lead, actually twice every lead, hunting down and hunting up, you can pick up what the coursing order is. So if you don't remember it, big deal. Just keep ringing, and 5 blows later, you can have learned it again. You can have figured it out from what you're doing. And then you can use that. If you've, you know, done the paper and pencil practice to start with, you can use that to help you figure out, yeah, okay, I can get it to come around. I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Don. Since this 4 o'clock.